Imagine you're a traveling business person in the 1910s and 20s and you're looking for a typewriter to join you in your travels. Chances are you would be looking at folding typewriters. They were fairly lightweight and decent performing machines that could snugly and safely fit in a rather small case. You could open the lid and flatten out the front of the case, leaving you able to have your machine on your lap without getting grease or ink stains on your clothes. And if you had a desk, it was easy enough to simply lift the machine out. There were several manufacturers making one, so already at this point you had some choices to make. I have some of those choices here. The Fox Portable No. 1, the Corona No. 3, and the Perkeo No. 3. I would have also liked to had one of the early Erica models here, as Erica No. 1 through 4 were all of a folding design, and a model that was widely used here in Europe, but I haven't been able to find one in good condition yet. But enough about that. Let's have a closer look at each machine that I actually have here individually. Corona 3. Corona typewriters started out in early 1900s, but initially under the name Standard Typewriter Company. In 1914, the name changed to Corona Typewriter Company, along with the success of their Corona 3 model. In 1926, they merged with L.C. Smith & Bros, and at first, they would brand their machines L.C. Smiths and Corona typewriters, where L.C. Smith stood for standards to be used in offices, and Corona made portable typewriters. As time went on, they abbreviated the name more and more, until they just became Smith Corona, which is their name to this date. They now make thermal labels and ribbons. The Corona 3 was the iteration of typewriter to come after the standard folding No. 1 and No. 2, hence the 3 in Corona 3. Its design quickly became iconic, which Corona would end up keeping in production for an incredible 29 years, albeit with a few modifications along the way there. In the end, Corona made just under 500,000 of these machines. Let's get into the mechanisms of this machine. This specific model is from 1916, so quite early in the line of production of these models. It is a 3-bank carriage shift machine. Fortunately, despite being carriage shift, it isn't heavy to lift as some can be. All keys represent 3 different stamps, lowercase, uppercase, and a figure, all accessible through either just the key alone or in combination with the key lever or the figure lever. The ribbon forwarding is a dual spooling mechanism, where the thing that decides which spool does the pulling and releasing is the thumb screw on top. You tighten the side you want to do the pulling and loosen up the one that should yield. Also relevant to the ribbon is a color selector. This lever flips to one of 2 spots, give you either black or red if you have a bichrome ribbon. It does however not give you a stencil mode. The paper rest has 2 arms that extend the paper rest simply by flipping them up. On the right side of the paper rest is a lever to disengage the feed rollers from the paper. In addition to this is also a margin release lever and a carriage release, both of which can be found on the left side of the carriage. The return arm is simply a thumb lever that you push back, where you can select single or double row forwarding by twisting a knob just next to the return arm. The margin system on this machine is interesting, and I have to add rare to see on the Corona 3. There are 3 margins on this. The middle one works as a left margin that you can cross freely moving towards the right side, but it will stop you moving back left unless you engage the margin release. Perhaps a mechanism to make it easy to define 2 left margins, like for writing the recipient for a letter with a smaller margin than the body of the letter? Whatever the case, I've been looking into this and the manual seems to only say there are only 2 margins. Other people I've asked also say this is the first time they see a Corona 3 with 3 margins. For all I know, this might be a hack made by some mechanic who just installed a second left margin because someone felt it might be useful. The keys themselves feel light when pressing down, but also a bit loose. Not to the point that I would say wobbly, but the levers do not really feel solid as I push them down. There is a millimeter or 2 of dead space before every key engages with the linkages and type arms, and it makes a tactile click when it does. This can kinda make it feel like the key is sort of rattling when you type on it, even if the feeling is discreet. When typing on the Corona, it moves quite well and has quite a substantial snap to it. The sound of the slug hitting the platen is sharp and kind of loud. The escapement and carriage movement doesn't move very quietly or smoothly, but it feels fairly good in use, except the keyboard being quite small, which is however the case with all folding typewriters. Let's move on to the next machine. Fox Portable No. 1. The Fox typewriters are one of those typewriters that many collectors know a lot about, even though not that many have one. They are not rare per se, but they are for sure not commonly found either. Many are big fans of the standards, and Fox's history is interesting, even though it is a sad example of just how everything can go wrong for a company. A couple of Fox's misfortunes could arguably be jotted up to poor management, but mostly it's just straight up bad luck. I could really ramble on with details on this, but I'll try to shorten the story. Because the American market was already heavily saturated by other brands, Fox had wanted to put more focus into the European and South American market. A strategy that would backfire when the World War I broke out, crippling a large part of their market. When the war ended, their bad luck didn't. Fox was shortly after faced with a lawsuit from Corona, which after an appeal they would thwart 6 out of 8 infringement claims. A good defense, but still a loss that forced them to pay Corona a substantial portion of their profits on these machines, that being the No. 1 and No. 2 of the portables. Another spot of bad luck in the same period of time hit when the Pennsylvania steelworkers strike broke out. It made steel a hard-to-get resource for 6 months, which hit their productivity pretty hard. All these events together, as well as Fox being a relatively small company compared to its competitors, made them have to close their doors permanently in 1922. So with that bit of history out of the way, let's get into the mechanisms here. This machine is from 1919. This particular machine is a bit beat up, unfortunately. It's missing 2 rear body panels and has many problems based in missing springs and screws here and there. Some parts are also bent and just doesn't work as they should. Because of this, it is a bit hard to say for sure how this machine would feel in use if it was flawless, but I'll do my best. Fox started making the portable No. 1 in 1917, and it was in production until 1919, when the No. 2 took over. Visually, it resembles the Corona, which was one of the infringement claims, with the curved front panel carrying the logo and the rounded frame surrounding the keys. It sports a 3-bank keyboard setup, and it has a very similar ribbon forwarding mechanism, which was also an infringement claim. And it supports a bichrome ribbon. The color selector on the Fox is a simple sliding switch to the left of the ribbon vibrator here. Differently from the Corona, however, the Fox had segment shift action, making the caps and figs very easy and light to use. It does have a folding carriage, but while Corona's folds forwards, Fox's folds backwards. Mine folds a bit iffy due to damage to a lever that has bent it to catch on the ledge in the rear. This is a problem and not by design, obviously. Typing on this actually feels different from the Corona. It's still light to the touch. It just feels like a more well put together piece of machinery, which is not to say the Corona is not well put together in any way, mind you. Another difference from the Corona, the Fox Portable sports an actual return arm as opposed to the thumb lever on the Corona. Unfortunately for me, this lever has taken a bit of a hit and doesn't work quite right, but I can see how it should have worked, and I think it would have made for a better implemented mechanism than that of the Corona. The only argument against it is that the machines do not weigh a lot, and pressing the arm the wrong way could in fact tip the machine. It doesn't have any kind of extended paper rest, and the levers on the carriage feels a bit flimsy. When repairing the Fox, I was forming many of its parts, and much of the metal felt a bit soft to me. It took surprisingly little force to bend it, and it leads me to think they may not have used the best metal for their parts. In the spirit of trying to make this video an acceptable length, let's move on to the third machine. Perkeo No. 3. Perkeo is an interesting brand in that not that many know of it, and at the same time they probably kind of do even without realizing it. Perkeo is made by Clemens Müller AG, and the typewriter connoisseur will know that this is the factory that made Urania. The first Urania machine was launched in 1909 and the Perkeo in 1912. At first, Urania kept to making standards for offices, while Perkeo made portables. In around 1920, a portable Urania was launched, but to a rather poor reception, at least compared to how the Perkeo sold. Over the years the Perkeo 3 was in production, they ended up making only just over 8,000 of it, making it today about the same rarity as the Fox Portable No. 1. Later, in 1925, the Urania Piccola was released, a non-folding typewriter which derived from Perkeo designs. It would prove to sell better than the Perkeo, perhaps proving that while folding typewriters were neat, it wasn't what the people wanted, at least not any longer. A fact that did not go unnoticed by Clemens and Müller, and in 1933 they shut down the Perkeo completely, releasing instead the Klein Urania in 1935, a non-folding machine that would otherwise be very similar to the Perkeo No. 3. After the war, Clemens Müller AG was no longer allowed to run independently, just like every other metalwork company in the now East Germany. It, along with Seidel und Neumann, another Dresden typewriter company, were around 1950 merged together into VEB Schreibmaschinenwerk Dresden. VEB abbreviated from Volkseigene Betrieb, or publicly owned enterprise, and Schreibmaschinenwerk meaning typewriter factory. Sadly, the merger was the end for Urania as a brand, as the newly formed company would drop Urania's designs and continue the production of Seidel and Neumann's Erika machines exclusively. I won't go farther into the history beyond this point, but one interesting note is that this company would through future company mergers become part of the industry giant VEB Kombinat Robotron, or commonly just Robotron. It would become one of the largest corporations in Europe of the 80s and 90s, employing at their height around 60,000 people. So on to the machine itself. The Perkeo No. 3 is also a 3-bank folding typewriter. Like the Corona, the carriage folds over the keyboard and has a carriage shift mechanism. Unlike the Corona, however, the carriage on the Perkeo is surprisingly heavy, to the point that when I first got the machine, I thought the shift was stuck, but no, just really heavy. The Perkeo is a good portion larger than the other two, which of course is reflected in weight as well. The surprise is therefore not that the carriage shift is heavier on the Perkeo compared to the Corona, it is how much heavier it is. The Perkeo is somewhat simpler or more basic than the other two in design. It does not support a bichrome ribbon. It has a single lever for releasing the carriage located only on the right, and a single lever for releasing the margin located on the left. It has a caps or shift lock mechanism, but instead of a key lever on the keyboard, this one uses a lever on the side of the frame, which can be a bit cumbersome to reach. Like the Corona, it sports a line forwarding thumb instead of an arm, and by means of a wheel you can flip around, you can select single or double line forwarding. Also, on the left side of the carriage is a small lever that can release the ratcheting mechanism, so you can finally adjust the lines on the machine. So compared to the other two, the Perkeo is more basic and seemingly more of a budget model, but that's where the budget experience stops. The keys on this thing feel surprisingly good. There is as good as zero dead space in the keys, and they have an even and nice resistance in their levers throughout the entire motion, while both the Corona and Fox really need you to be on point with your typing technique for optimal and even print, as is the case with most ultra-portable typewriters. This thing just flies. In fact, when I lined the three of these up to type on them, my fingers were so accustomed to the demands of the other two that when I got to the Perkeo, I worried I chipped the platen from how hard the slugs hit it with my initial test type. The mechanism inside this machine generates momentum very well for its size, which is likely an effect of being quite a good amount larger than its competitors. Summing up then, the Corona is a very efficient machine with a decent typing action on it. The Fox is very similar in feeling but has a few details that are arguably nicer, like its return arm, its segment shift, and its marginally better feeling construction. The Perkeo is the most budget machine of the bunch, but its larger size and solid construction makes it probably the best performing machine in terms of actual typing. I hope this video has been interesting to you. If you enjoyed it, please consider adding a like and perhaps even a comment to this. Of course, please feel free to subscribe as well. Until next time then.